Welcome into 247 Sports Live, where talking season is coming to an end and now camp season begins. I'm Grace Remington. Thank you for being here with us. Please like this video and subscribe to the 247 Sports YouTube channel so you never miss a piece of content from us. Let's take a look at what's on tap for today's show. Florida State is our next season preview as we continue counting down till 2024 kickoff. We'll take a look inside the expectations of the ACC as their media days wrap up, and the Big Ten welcoming 4 newcomers from the West Coast. We're going to do a deep dive into those as well. So Big Ten media days wrapping up today as we take a look at last year's standings. This is the last time we will see it this way, as Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State will no longer be competing for a Big Ten championship spot against Iowa because there will no longer be divisions and a whole lot more competition. We have 4 newcomers coming over from the West Coast, with Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC joining the Big Ten fun. And with that, I welcome in Brandon Huffman, our West Coast expert, but he's really an expert on all things college football. But let's start with USC. Lincoln Riley had a very interesting quote at Big Ten Media Days. He said USC is playing catch up in facilities, in NIL, in resources within a program. He says they're catching up in dang near every way you can think. Huff, what do you think about this underdog mentality he's adopting?
It's a little bit of a change from 2 years ago when he took the USC job, when he left Oklahoma, and he raved about the resources that USC had. He raved about all the natural built-in attributes that made USC what it was under Pete Carroll and even previously, and why he left Oklahoma and their resources. So now you're seeing a little bit of a backtrack. Does that coincide with Washington playing for a national championship just 6 months ago, with Oregon being a hot name nationally with recruiting? Is there a little bit of a goalpost moving here with Lincoln Riley? It sure sounds like it, as if it's trying to, make the expectations of them being picked 6th in the media poll in the Big Ten and trying to maybe soften the blow a little bit when they come out of the gate with a schedule that includes LSU in Las Vegas, when they have to play Michigan, and they maybe have a little bit of a tougher ride when you consider that they were really the ones that started this Pac-12 to the Big Ten exodus 2 years ago when they made the move with UCLA, but USC was a big reason for that move. So are we seeing a little bit of a lowering of expectations? It sure kind of seems like it, with USC dealing with the loss of Caleb Williams and some other losses that they're having personnel-wise. We'll see if that tune is the same if the year doesn't go as planned in USC.
It is an interesting backtrack, and kind of funny he didn't include defense in that list of things that need catching up. But another school making headlines this week is UCLA. They begin a new era in the Big Ten with their former player, Deshaun Foster, who knows a lot about the Bruins, doesn't know as much about public speaking. He's going viral for an awkward opening statement at Big Ten Media Days. But Huff, why shouldn't fans judge him by this first impression?
Well, I mean, he made a great point in a great article with Brandon Marcello and John Telty yesterday, where he said, there's a lot of coaches that were great public speakers, but didn't necessarily win. So what he was being brought in to do was not to give great press conferences. Chip Kelly answered great questions at press conference, and there was no buzz, no excitement whatsoever at UCLA. But the players loved Deshaun Foster. Scott Taylor, who is a commit to UCLA in this class, raved about what kind of coach he is to him in that article yesterday. So he's not being brought in to win press conferences. He's being brought in to win games, and more importantly, to capture the alumni and the fans that Chip Kelly basically alienated for 6 years. UCLA has had great public speakers as head coaches before. Rick Neuheisel was one of them. Jim Mora did a great job. Both have been on television. Nobody's going to confuse Deshaun Foster for a future television personality, but that's not why he was hired by Martin Jarman for. So the players are bought in, recruits are buying in, the fans are buying in, and that is what he's going to have to focus on, because clearly that Big Ten Media Day appearance is going to probably loom over him for a little while until the season starts.
Yep, there's talkers and then there's coaches, but one guy who can do both is Dan Lanning at Oregon. His Ducks have the second best odds to win the Big Ten, the third best odds to win the national championship, and this is after signing top 3 classes in the transfer portal and recruiting. So how do you see their first season in the Big Ten playing out?
It's national championship or bust for Oregon. Now, keep in mind, the last 2 years, they've been on the brink of potentially going to the playoffs or going to the conference championship game. 2 years ago, before they lost at home to Washington. Then they lost on the road to Oregon State in the rivalry game. Then last year, lost at Washington, and then lost to Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. So they've been knocking on the door, but Dan Lanning has to beat Washington. He's got to be his rival. Now, Kalen DeBoer is at Alabama. He's no longer there to torture him, but this team is being built with the mindset that they're not just going to compete for a Big Ten title in their first year, but that they're going to compete for a national title. With Dylan Gabriel there to replace Bo Nix, with receivers like Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart to soften the blow of losing Troy Franklin, an offensive line that's got some strength like Josh Connerly, the former #1 tackle in the country. This offense has the capability of putting Oregon into a position to not just win the Big Ten, but to compete for that national title. But he has got to beat the Huskies in order to get the fans really fully behind him. Now, they're in behind him. We saw that in the offseason when there was talk he might leave for Alabama. But they want that win over Washington because right now he's 0-3 against the Huskies, 1-1 against Oregon State. And much like another coach that who's in the Big Ten is a little bit in battle for losing to his rival, it's got to be you've got to beat that rival and compete for the national championship and do both at the same time.
Well, that win against the Huskies may come easily or a little bit more easily this year because after 14 wins in the best season in school history, Washington's win total is now set at 6.5. So that just goes to show you the public expectations, the market's expectations for year one under Jedd Fisch. But Huff, what are your expectations for Washington?
I don't think that there's any reason to think that the Huskies can't be successful in their first year in the Big Ten. Now, will they be winning 10, 11 games like they did in Kalen DeBoer's first year? Maybe not. Kalen DeBoer had a lot of talent that was inherited from Jimmy Lake's disastrous regime, but that were players that were brought in under Chris Peterson. Jedd Fisch was saying at the Big Ten Media Day press conference, he had over 40 transfers and new faces that he's having to replace and bring in to the program, including at quarterback, where they lose the Heisman Trophy runner-up Michael Penix. Now there's the potential of the competition between a transfer from Mississippi State and a true freshman quarterback that was signed with Arizona when he was there. If they can figure out that quarterback, they've got a running back in Jonah Coleman, who was in Indianapolis today, who was stellar at Arizona the last couple of years. And Jedd Fisch, what he did in year one at Arizona may have been forgettable. They lost to Northern Arizona at home. Their one win was over a Cal team with COVID, but there were signs of life there despite a depleted roster. And then in year two, you really started to see the corner get turned. And then in year three, they won 10 plus games. There's not going to be a one-win season with a loss to an FCS school on the calendar in 2024. There may not be a return to the national championship game, but I think that Washington has a great coach with Jedd Fisch, a great staff that's doing a really good job recruiting, and I think you're going to see them have a pretty strong 2024 season, even with all the new faces, especially on the sidelines.
Michigan in a similar spot, having to replace so much output from their national title team. They have to replace Jim Harbaugh, their defensive coordinator, and a program record 13 drafted players to the NFL, which includes quarterback J.J. McCarthy. So, Huff, what do you see as their biggest hurdle as they begin their title defense?
Well, it's just meshing all that offense, losing J.J. McCarthy, losing Blake Corum. They've got an outstanding running back in Donovan Edwards. Alex Orji is getting a lot of attention, a lot of buzz for what he's supposed to be able to do this year. You have Sherrone Moore, who was a head coach for a number of games last year when Harbaugh was suspended. So this isn't going to be a huge transition for him. Now it's his program. Now he gets to put his stamp on the program, but he's got experience being the head coach. So despite losing a lot of talent, like you said, 13 NFL draft players, there's still some talent, especially on that defense. Mason Graham, one of the best defensive players in all of college football, regardless of position. Will Johnson, another stellar defensive back for the Wolverines. And let's keep an eye on Zeke Berry. This is a player that we loved coming out of the 2022 class. He was the All-American Bowl Defensive Player of the Year out of De La Salle. He had an injury that kind of slowed him down as a sophomore in 2023, but he's been waiting his turn, and he should help bolster that secondary for Michigan. This is a team that has prided itself on winning at the line of scrimmage, and now you've got an offensive line coach as your head coach. He wants to continue to win in the trenches, but it might be the defense that does a lot of the heavy lifting for the Wolverines this year, which is fine by Sherrone Moore, who loves to win by physical.
Yep, that defense still one of the best in the country, will definitely help ease Sherrone Moore into the job. Now, the Big Ten is doing away with divisions this year, as most conferences are, but the Big Ten title game has been Ohio State or Michigan for the past 7 years, and then whoever comes out of the West. So how does removing divisions change the overall outlook of this conference?
Well, it's definitely going to make it more fascinating to see how it works out, because without there being a true East-West or North-South, you might have a couple of in-season rematches of games that were played early in the year. Maybe it's Ohio State and Oregon. Maybe it's Ohio State and Michigan. Maybe it's Michigan and Washington. But doing away with the divisions almost ensures that you're going to get the two best teams. And we saw that in the last couple of years where the East champion was the dominant team, the Michigan, the Ohio State, whereas maybe the West team wasn't as strong. And maybe they were a 7-5 team who won the division. I mean, we even go back to the early years of the Big Ten championship game where because of probation, teams that were 6-6, 7-5 got to sneak in. Well, now you don't have a gigantic gap between the two best teams because one won a weaker division and one won a stronger division. Now you're going to get the two best teams, and that's going to come in huge in the hand when you have the conference or the college football playoff taking the conference champion and pretty much ensuring a bye. That makes that conference championship game that much more important because you get a week off rather than having to prepare for another team that may be a little bit equal in talent to you, but didn't win their own conference. That's why this conference championship is going to be so great, because you're going to have two teams, maybe likely in the top 10, and they're playing for that first round bye now.
A more competitive Big Ten title game is definitely welcome in this new playoff scene. Brandon Huffman, one of the best out there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Race.
ACC Media Days also rolling to a close today. The biggest storyline coming out of the conference is the ongoing legal battles between Florida State, Clemson, and the ACC, and those two staple schools potentially leaving the conference. But amid the recent realignment rush, the ACC is expanding this fall, adding SMU, Cal, and Stanford. Florida State and Clemson remain the favorites to win the ACC, with Miami close behind. Brad Crawford joining me now with more after ACC Media Days. And let's start with the Canes, Brad, where Mario Cristobal begins his third season in Coral Gables after going 3-5 in conference play in back-to-back years. But this start of the season feels a little different with Cam Ward coming in. Brad, what do you think constitutes a successful season for the Canes?
It certainly does, Grace. And one of the biggest keys for me is this new look transfer portal laden offense has to find its rhythm early. There's a bunch of new pieces down there. Cam Ward, as you mentioned. Look, each of Mario Cristobal's first 2 years down there in Miami, he's had a rocky first half of the schedule. He lost 2 ACC games last year to start things off, started 2-3 in 2022. Well, the Canes this season, they open at Florida. They play USF and Virginia Tech all in September. So this program really has to win those games if it plans on being a playoff contender, which is what the program expectations are this season with Ward, Damian Martinez from Oregon State, and some of those guys. So they have to find that offensive rhythm early, especially down there in Gainesville. And I think everything's in place for Cristobal to win big this season, but he's got to prove it can happen. He had a losing record his first year, 7-6, I think it was last season. So year 3, this is the tell-all, be-all for Mario Cristobal. And with as much money as Miami's NIL collective has put toward this roster, he has to win big, and it's got to happen now.
Another ACC school getting a lot of attention this offseason is NC State. And they've always kind of felt like a steady presence, though it was hard to believe. I saw they haven't won 10 games since 2002, and they haven't played in the ACC championship game since 2005. Those now feel like reachable goals. So what do you think is the biggest hurdle in accomplishing those goals?
They certainly do. I mean, there's a ton of hype in Raleigh right now. Dave Doran's had 4 9-win seasons at NC State, and he hasn't tempered expectations a bit this summer. He thinks this team can get to 10 or more wins this fall and get to that playoff. I have followed this program a long time, more than 2 decades, and I don't remember there being this much hype in July around the Wolfpack since, take it back 20 years, 2003, when they started top 15 with Phillip Rivers at quarterback. There's a throwback for you. So you have to like what NIL, NC State has done there in Raleigh. They really came together this offseason as a unit and really strengthened this roster. They went hard in the portal. Grayson McCall at quarterback, Duke's Jordan Waters. You see the schedule there. 2 very important games early. You've got Tennessee and Charlotte. That's a nationally ranked top 25 matchup. And NC State's ACC opener comes 2 weeks later in Death Valley. If they win that game, Grace, and start off 1-0 in the ACC, having beaten the Vols 2 weeks prior, then NC State's 4-0 and inside the top 10, And then these expectations go to another level. So NC State's a team that is in my preseason top 25, and certainly I think capable of getting to the playoff and winning the ACC.
Okay, I like that. And also, I'm a huge Phillip Rivers fan, so I appreciate that throwback.
Yeah.
But based on everything you've heard at Media Days, Brad, who is your sleeper team in the ACC?
Yeah, I think this one for me is based on what I haven't heard, and I'm very surprised Virginia Tech hasn't received more love this summer. I mean, really throughout the offseason, we have not mentioned the Hokies. They lead college football with 22 returning starters. That's the entire offense, defense, starting lineup right there. They're the only top 25 team preseason that we have that has to play 2 nationally ranked teams all year. That's it. One of those is Clemson in November, and they get the Tigers at Lane Stadium. We know how hard of an environment that is, especially at night. There's some NFL caliber guys back on defense. Antoine Powell-Ryland, 10 sacks, 15 tackles for losses. Kyron Drones at quarterback. So the schedule, in my opinion, is manageable. And whenever you're picking sleepers, Grace, you have to look at the schedule first, talent second, and I'd say coaching third. So they have everything in place now under Brent Pry to do really well. And I just think that as a whole, a media collective, so to speak, we are sleeping on Virginia Tech as a possible ACC title threat, and the schedule and the roster sets up for it.
Yeah, that feels really rare to return all 22 starters in this transfer portal era. That's a great stat. Well, I mentioned this at the top of the segment, Brad, but the biggest ACC storyline, and it kind of overshadowed ACC Media Days, you could feel kind of the tension there, is Clemson and FSU potentially leaving the conference. Now, the deadline to notify the ACC that they intend to leave the following year is August 15th. How likely do you think the move is for these two staples?
Yeah, the expectation based on what I've heard in Charlotte is FSU and Clemson are not going to try and depart August 15th. Now, if the Noles and Tigers really had it their way, they would be in another league altogether right now. But that grant of rights, I mean, that's the thing that is holding up in court right now. I do think FSU and Clemson eventually separate from the ACC. I just don't think the rumored jump to the Big 12 has serious legs. And in saying that, if Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark has his way and the league gets that private equity funding that has been rumored for the last month or so, then that could be the clincher, then sort of gets the Noles and Tigers to leap if they're able to win these lawsuits, as I mentioned. But, you know, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips, he said this week in Charlotte, he made it very clear that his league, the ACC that is bigger than any one or two programs. I mean, he directly called out the Noles and the Tigers there. But I could see some hemorrhaging if FSU and Clemson successfully challenge that grant of rights. And I've been told programs like North Carolina, Virginia, they're both sort of in wait-and-see mode, and they're kind of watching from the back of the pack to see what happens with FSU and Clemson. If the Big 10, SEC, or Big 12 does get those two teams, FSU and Clemson, I don't see how the ACC can last, 3, 5, 10 years down the road.
All right, so the drama continues. Brad Crawford with the latest from ACC Country. Thanks so much for joining us. For more of Brad's work, head over to 247sports.com. Our national writers, our beat writers, keeping you up to date with everything you need to know about your favorite college football team and maybe your not so favorite college football teams. We got recruiting rankings, message boards, exclusive news you can't find anywhere else. It's 247sports.com. Well, Florida State is back in camp, rebuilding its national title aspirations. And in the meantime, you can help FSU to a championship behind your game console. In case you missed it, 247 Sports got exclusive early access to EA Sports College Football, and our experts played the game and have all the hints. So if you haven't cracked it open yet, head over to 247sports.com for more on how to play with FSU. Now, the real-life Seminoles still trying to recover from the catastrophe of going undefeated in 2023, yet being snubbed out of the Final Four in the college football playoff. The Noles went 13-0, including 3 wins against ranked teams and an ACC championship title against Louisville. So with that, we bring in our FSU expert, Brendan Sonnone. Brendan, I don't know about you, but all the FSU fans in my life have not gotten over the snub from last season. So how is the team moving on from that drama?
Yes, same here. Just got a text from a buddy a little while ago. Said he watched all the 2023 condensed games today, which is an interesting practice to do on a July afternoon, and it still hurt for him. So yes, it's still a thing around Florida State, around Tallahassee. Imagine that'll kind of linger for quite some time. Now, in regards to the football program, it's interesting. It's this balancing act, it's a dynamic that's going to be kind of fascinating to follow because Mike Norvell, whole tenor of his program is built on being genuine and real and authentic. That's part of his pitching, his sales pitches to recruits. When he calls someone a real one, that's the highest compliment he can give a player. And when the snub happened, he was pretty clear that that is a thing that can stick with players for a while, that it was okay to be angry with it because that's a real response, to be disappointed, to be genuinely hurt by what happened and the opportunity that you did not have that you felt like you had earned. But that being said, you have to move forward as well. You can't dwell on it. And that's the balancing act that Mike Norvell and the Florida State program kind of have to strike this season. You had ACC Media Days, Josh Farmer said he was angry still at what had happened. Darius Washington said, though, it wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about proving themselves right and validating what they knew they did last year. FSU returns about 70 to 75 players from last year's team. Yes, they lose Jordan Travis. They lose Jared Verse. A lot of focal main pieces of that team. But the guys on that roster, don't forget what happened. Just can't dwell on it. I think, Grace, what will help FSU is they have a nice influx of incoming talent in the transfer portal. About 10 or so players will be starters or major contributors for them from the portal, and guys like DJ Uiagalelei, Malik Benson, Roydell Williams, all coming from pretty good programs that had success last season and kind of bring in some, a little bit of a fresh perspective, if you will, to kind of help you move things along a little bit.
Okay, so sounds like a healthy processing is going on. Looking at the field, though, biggest position they have to replace is Jordan Travis. And the coaching staff looked at other quarterbacks, but there's a reason why they went with DJU in the transfer portal. So what do they expect to get out of him in his 5th season?
The thing I find interesting about DJ Uiagalelei is the public perception of him nationally, I think, is really baked into what he was expected to be as a number 1 overall recruit, as a 5-star prospect when he went to Clemson, and then what he did as a true freshman in the 2020 game against Notre Dame as a true freshman, and then the drop off in 2021 where he was put in as a starter behind or in place of Trevor Lawrence, and it just didn't go well. The 2022 season for him wasn't inefficient by any means. It was actually pretty solid at Clemson. Then he ended up going to Oregon State and was really solid there last year too. It was probably one of the top 20, 25 most efficient quarterbacks last year in a variety of metrics. And then the film kind of matches that too. So you have 2 really solid seasons. He doesn't really turn the ball over a ton. I think you know what you're getting in DJ Uiagalelei of your Florida State. And that was part of the appeal of recruiting him when they started to look at the idea of going into the transfer portal for a quarterback to replace Jordan Travis. Really, the only 2 names we ever heard for them were either Cam Ward or DJ Uiagalelei. Cam Ward wanted to kind of go through a process of seeing what happened with the NFL draft, and FSU wanted to move along pretty quickly and have a quarterback in place for spring ball and even during the January recruiting cycle. So with that in mind, DJ Uiagalelei brings a lot of stability because of what he's done in 3 years as a starter, but the last 2 being pretty solid ones. He's won at a pretty high level. He's done well in 2 very different types of schemes, and that gives FSU a lot of confidence in what he'll be able to do in Tallahassee. The main things he'll be able to do, I think, is push the ball downfield. He still has a giant arm. He's able to get the ball downfield vertically. FSU surrounded him with a lot of speed, and he could run the ball effectively too. This isn't some fleet of foot, lightning fast running quarterback, but he's 250 pounds. He's a bit of a tank. Had a source tell me when they first brought him in, we won't ever really not convert on 4th and 1 if we want to go with the quarterback sneak, and the stats kind of bear that out over his career. So you have some elements to his game to build on. You've added a supporting cast to kind of help supplement what he does well, and I think FSU's optimistic about what he brings. Again, the key word for me with DJ Uiagalelei, stability.
That's true. On the other side of the ball, this defense ranks top 20 last year in opponents scoring allowed, but that unit lost 5 players to the NFL draft. So how do they effectively replace some of that star power?
Yeah, not going to be easy. Jared Verses don't grow on trees. Him and Braden Fisk are now teammates for the Los Angeles Rams. Both were top 50 draft picks. Then you lose 2 starters in the secondary, Bernardo Green, Jerry and Jones, who were 2nd and 3rd round picks, I believe. And then a handful of other starters and contributors as well, all ACC. Linebacker Kalen DeLoach, Tatum Bethune was drafted. Like there's a lot to replace there. Not going to be easy. It's going to be an interesting blend of some homegrown talent, right? You have Josh Farmer, who I mentioned earlier at defensive tackle. He was an all ACC caliber defensive tackle, despite playing most of last year, at least half of it with a hand injury that really limited him. Pat Payton's getting all ACC buzz at defensive end. It's a really good group of defensive ends in the ACC this year. So we'll see if he ends up being like a preseason all ACC guy, but he's being considered as like a top 50 NFL draft pick going into this year. So you have some really good pieces on the defensive line that you return. DJ Lundy's a very solid linebacker. Shaheem Brown was an all-conference safety. And then Fentrell Cypress and Isaiah Thomas are really good cornerbacks. They both put together pretty good springs, really solid preseason camp so far, just 2 days in for Florida State. And both those guys will probably be playing on Sunday. So that's kind of your nucleus of what you bring back. And then you have to supplement it, again, probably with the transfer portal. FSU's done that as well as anyone in the country over the last few years. Marvin Jones Jr. is a defensive end transfer from Georgia. His dad was a legacy at Florida State. He was a former 5-star recruit. They weren't entirely sure if he was going to be more of a situational guy when he first came in or if he could push to be a starter. He was awesome in the spring, so the expectations for him are really high, and for him and Pat Payton to be a good 1-2 punch. And then behind those two, they have Sione Lolohea, who was an all Pac-12 second-team member. So that's the kind of depth I think they think they have. Daryl Jackson was not able to play most of last season due to an NCAA ruling on transfers, which has since been changed. That seems to happen a lot to Florida State. And Daryl Jackson, they think really highly of as just this massive 6'6", 330-pound defensive tackle. Was actually high school teammates with Josh Farmer, so those two get to reunite, maybe cause havoc for the Seminoles. So blend of transfer portals, some new additions, along with guys that you've been developing and have kind of integrated into like more substantial roles over the last few years. They're really confident what they have on defense this year, despite of what they lost last season.
Obviously, the path to the playoff a lot easier this year with the expanded 12-team field. And despite the turnover on the roster, Florida State is still the favorite to win the ACC. But what do you think constitutes a successful season for Mike Norvell in 2024?
I think Vegas has Florida State. Last I checked at 9.5 wins. And that feels like right to me. I don't know if this team, going into last year, I thought it was going to be probably a 10, 11 win team. They exceeded expectations in the regular season to win 12 games. And then obviously the ACC championship game. So you knew so much of what you had. Jordan Travis and a lot of the other returning pieces. It was a like commodity, like proven commodity based offense, and even the defense too had a lot of knowns, and some guys ended up elevating and stepping up and ascending. This year, a lot more unknowns. There's more variables to me. It makes me a little uneasy to say that this is going to be a likely double-digit win team. With that being said, it's a really talented team. It is. They've assembled a really good group, again, through development and then transfer portal supplementation. It's been really good for FSU, that formula, and the baseline of like high school talent they're recruiting is starting to get better as well. So with all that being said, like this is a group that FSU feels like is legitimately faster and bigger and stronger than it was last year. I think that's coach speak. Like they have GPS testing and whatnot to back that up. It's just a matter like, is it as experienced? Is it all going to be as cohesive as it was last year? And that's the variable, Grace. Like I'm not entirely confident in saying that I think you're definitely a double-digit win season. But if you're able to push that range, get to 9 or 10 wins, if you're able to beat Florida and beat Miami, and Mike Norvell has done that at a really high level. I think he's 5-1 in the last 3 seasons against the rivals. Both those coaches are kind of on the ropes a little bit. Like if you're able to do that and be in the conversation for a playoff spot with, to me, it kind of feels like a reload / rebuild kind of in between year. I think that'd be a really good step in showing that this is a very stable program that Mike Norvell has built. I would consider that excessive. You can get to 9 and 10 wins with wins over rivals.
Okay, an intriguing season ahead for the Noles. And Brendan Sonnone with the latest from Tallahassee. Thanks so much for joining us. For more of Brendan's work and the rest of our Noles team, check out Noles247.com. They got you covered with everything FSU football and recruiting. That's Noles247.com. And that'll do it for us today on 247 Sports Live. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the 247 Sports YouTube channel. We'll see you next time.